12th of 2008. It was an awful earthquake in China, 7.98 on the Richter scale. And the quake was reported literally as it was happening by Chinese citizens texting in, posting photos, in some cases posting videos up to QQ, which is China's largest internet service, and also rebroadcasting it over Twitter. Now, this happened to hit at a time when China was experimenting with an increasing degree of openness and press freedom and so forth, and so they went with it, right? They said, okay, so this is, our citizens are reporting this stuff. It's happened. It's terrible. There was this incredible inwelling of goodwill, right? The donation sites go up immediately in the hour after the quake. And then, as it became apparent that the deaths were disproportionately borne by children in schools. And this is in a country where, because of their one-child policy, to lose one child is to become childless. There was a growing awareness among parents that the schools had fallen down, even though they'd been built in an earthquake zone, because they hadn't been built to earthquake-proof standards. And they hadn't been built to earthquake-proof standards because the contractors had bribed the local officials to save on the construction costs. And so what they had done is built death traps for their own children, and the parents were, as one would be, devastated by this. But they weren't just devastated, they were radicalized. And they were in part radicalized because they were in enough communication with one another that they could coordinate their reactions. It wasn't just private grief times 10,000, it was public grief and outrage. And they began to document the collapse of the schools and also put that up on QQ and send those pictures out over Twitter and so forth. It gathered steam and gathered steam. And finally, and all of a sudden, about a month after the quake, the Chinese government said, that's enough. That's enough with press openness. It's illegal to talk about this. It's illegal for the mainstream press to mention this. We're going to start arresting people, which they did. And what happened is that the Chinese model of internet censorship, which has been easily the most effective in the world, broke. There are 10,000 media sources outside China facing inwards. There are 1 billion media sources inside China facing outwards. Anybody with a mobile phone now also has access to a global publishing platform. And so the Chinese were, I think, the first nation, though so certainly not the last, to run across this recognition that like the Maginot Line, the defenses they've built are facing the wrong way for the problem they've got. This kind of technological autoimmune disease, this is very different from 20th century propaganda, Voice of America, competing pamphlets kind of stuff. This is at a level where it's not nation to nation or even nation to professional organization. It's the nation state versus a kid with a camera phone who can run faster than anybody can catch him. And the point at which you try and shut that kid down, the damage to the country as a whole over the long term is so grievous that this becomes a kind of cat and mouse game. And no one knows where it's going. Dictatorships have proven remarkably and sadly resilient and ingenious at finding ways of seeing off short-term threats. But at the same time, over the 15 years we've been watching, the threat from the network has risen and risen and risen. And the closer the threat gets to the phone and the closer the threat gets to the average person in the street, the harder it has been so far to have any way of capping the threat without also damaging the nation.
Read and watch more from Clay Shirky at btnn.tv.